no spin. The propaganda's a win, stress feeding on my tension. My countrymen, they love their fiction. Words upon now, it's made with good intentions.
Kia ora, this is Philip, one of your hosts of 1 of 200. We have a midweek episode, an issues episode, as we sometimes call them. This is an interview with Kieran Kelly, one of our long-time favorite guests, much requested, much supported guest of the podcast. We're going to be talking a bit about international law, a bit about laws of war, combatant status, genocide, things of this nature. So if that's why you're here, good, you're in the right place. And if that's not why you're here, turn tail and flee because that's what you're gonna get. Look, we've been talking a lot, and by we, I don't just mean 1 of 200, I mean media as a kind of institution, about what wars look like, what genocide looks like, what cruelty and ethnic cleansing look like on a kind of historic scale. So we have one of, I want to say, New Zealand's most dedicated experts on to talk about that. So, Kieran, how are you doing? Not to gas you up too much, mate. How are you doing?
Yeah, no, very inflated. And yeah, well, tickety boo.
Tickety boo. Absolute
Yeah, how are
delight.
you?
An absolute delight. What an absolute treat. Okay. So look, would you mind giving us a bit of grounding? What are we talking about tonight? Kieran, what are we covering?
Yeah, so it's talking about like with the recent targeting of journalists in Gaza, and this being part of a pattern. I think one of the things that's happening is that in the minds of the Israelis, these people are legitimate targets. And there is a history to this. There is a history of redefining non-combatants as combatants. So I thought it would be worth going through the history of how we decided to have this principle of distinction, as it's called, where you are not meant to attack non-combatants. So if you go back to like some early texts like Sun Tzu and Deuteronomy, they kind of had these kind of pragmatic ideas of like, if you're at war, you don't attack women and children and the elderly and so forth. And the it was vague and said nothing about military age males, regardless of whether they were bearing arms or not. But about 2,000 years ago in India, they had something called the Laws of Manu, which had a proper principle of distinction by saying that people who were outside, who were no longer combatants because they were wounded or disarmed or surrendering, were not to be killed, and it was a prohibition. So it's legalistic, basically. So, this is similar to what we have today. There have been other things over history. So the Quran forbids the killing of non-military age males. What we'll find is that often there is a lot of slippage when it comes to military age males. There is a lot of ability for people to get away with killing them even when they're clearly non-combatants, because they psychologically, for people, culturally, are seen as a threat or able to defend themselves or that sort of thing. And so moving on to like medieval Europe, there was what was called the Pax Dei, the peace of God. This basically it said you're not allowed to attack non-combatants, you're not allowed to attack women, children, elderly, priests, and so forth. But a very interesting thing happened with that, which was when they went on crusades, these sorts of things didn't apply when you're talking about Jews. They didn't apply when you're talking about Cathars. It didn't apply when they started building empires and dealing with non-European peoples. These things don't apply. And I think one of the themes that you find about the protection of non-combatants is that often it relies on there being no nationalistic or tribal power intent there. So that, for example, in European feudalism, you're basically having a bunch of feudal lords and sovereigns attacking each other, and the peasants are almost background to this. They're interchangeable. You can swap them around, and nationalism really didn't become a big feature of war in Europe because it's a kind of successor state to the Roman Empire, and it had this uniting Catholic Church. So nationalism didn't really come into things until after the French Revolution. Before that, of course, you had the wars of religion, where religion was very important, but it's a different story slightly. So in Europe, Hugo Grotius in 1625 also prohibited attacks on people who weren't military-age males and on prisoners as well. But then Jean-Jacques Rousseau in The Social Contract wrote that war is not a relation between man and man, but between state and state. And that was actually kind of the start of the idea that you could have a civilian, that there was a different world that was outside of the world that rightfully belonged to warfare. So Jean-Etienne Marie Portalis also wrote, it is a relationship that this is war, it is a relationship between objects and not individuals which constitutes war. It is relations between states, not between individuals. And he and Talleyrand added this to the Code Napoleon. So it became part of the law at that point. And this became what was known as the Rousseau-Portalis Doctrine. And this was important for two reasons. One was that it formed the basis of the laws of belligerent occupation. So when a belligerent occupation is when one side's military takes over a territory and it has a population there. And of course, because of that distinction between military and civilian, the inhabitants are civilians and have to be treated as such. So, this is a very important thing. But another very important thing about it is that Raphael Lemkin, when he described genocide for the first time, he described it as being the antithesis of the Rousseau-Portalis doctrine. So what he means is treating the civilians as objects of warfare. So, and I think it's worth bearing in mind that when Lemkin first described genocide, he wrote it in a book called Axis Rule in Occupied Europe. He was writing about a method of occupation. So we often think of genocide in very kind of highly mythologized ways, particularly about government attacking minorities in their own country, whereas in fact the first ever usage of the term was talking about military occupation. And
sorry, Kieran, I was gonna ask actually with reference to that what the context was, what the historical kind of context was about that shift. Like, are we talking about an explicit kind of change in cultural dynamic? What is it that makes that dynamic change? Because that seems like a reasonably significant change in terms of like legal frameworks.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that, the obvious answer to that was that people were doing in Europe what they had been doing in Africa and the Americas and so forth, and therefore it became problematic. And this is, I think, I was talking about how when the peasants are interchangeable, you do not need to commit genocide. But imperialism, I believe you used the term just this week, social reproduction, and imperialism is about social reproduction. So part of that is to impose what Lemkin called is the national pattern on the people or the soil. So either way, you either cleanse the soil of the people or you eradicate the culture and nature of the people and change them into the version that the empire wants. So yeah, so that's basically how that changed, or why it suddenly became of interest to Europeans. Having said that, of course, Lemkin was very interested in historical genocides. He'd been thinking about this for a long time, but he probably wouldn't have gotten any traction in getting anyone else to pay attention to it if it hadn't been for the atrocities happening in Europe. So the way the law continued was basically the Hague Conventions of 1899 and 1907 made it explicit the distinction between military and civilian. And then in 1949, you have the Geneva Conventions, and the Fourth Convention in particular lays out rules for belligerent occupation, which are quite strict. So the basically an occupying force has a lot of responsibilities and pretty much no rights as an occupier. All of the onus is on them. Now, if we think back to the kind of model of warfare where you don't care about the nature of the people, they're interchangeable. I know I've previously, when I've written about this, I've called it Clausewitzian because he was the kind of he was a very prominent theorist of this sort of warfare. It's warfare purely between armies and states and so forth. If you think about the nature of an occupation under that sort of warfare, basically the armies are occupying space for military purposes. So their interactions with the civilians are going to be pretty much just keep law and order and keep the peace. Whereas an imperialistic aimed occupation looks very different. It it tries to change the nature of the occupied country, and a lot of the Fourth Geneva Convention forbids anything that would any transfer of populations, any appropriation of economic infrastructure, that sort of thing. Kind of there is a distinction, I think, that can be drawn between genocidal and non-genocidal warfare. Again, going back to the fact that genocide was conceived by Lemkin as a form of warfare, not as I mean, obviously, it has a broader definition. You can apply genocide to legally and conceptually. You can apply it to the actions taken by governments against internal minorities. Clearly, there is that, but primarily it does happen during wartime, and there is a reason why it was conceived as a type of warfare, a kind of extension in a way of warfare by Lemkin. If you think of, for example, the case of the stolen generation in Australia, which is, an adjudicated case of genocide. This is taking children away from their parents. I mean, obviously there's violence involved, but it's not immediate. It's not about extermination. This is about changing the cultural nature of a population. But it came from a process of warfare at one stage. So there's that. Although obviously this is not the topic of this talk today. Yeah.
Like I think it is interesting. Like we're essentially probing what the difference is between genocide and non-genocide, right? Like in this kind of juncture in current affairs, anyone who cares about, I guess, humanity is questioning the G word in quite a like personalized way, I think. I've met a lot of people who are saying, well, is it genocide? I mean, we're like the obviously the elephant in the room is Palestine, but even going beyond that, I think the understanding of what international law means these days has become a bit of a rubric to kind of think about things in a different way because it's scary, right? Like if anyone can just be killed by someone who's more powerful than you, then where's the manager, right? Like I'm not gonna call the manager,
Yeah,
unfortunately. It's there's a terrifying kind of subconscious element to that, I think, that people are finally waking up to understand the power dynamics that we just live in on a daily basis with a hegemon that genuinely doesn't care about whether we live or die. So that's partly like I want to dive a bit into what you mean by genocide during wartime and genocide not during wartime. Like that distinction is interesting as a historical kind of parallel and coming into the modern day in terms of what that means. I think like it has some kind of, I guess, rhetorical valence, right? Like people care about whether something's called a genocide or not for some reason, regardless of like is that an important distinction? I don't know. I want to zoom
absolutely.
out a
I
little
mean,
bit.
there is never a moral justification for genocide. Now, you can morally justify taking up arms in some way. I think that I'm an anti-war person, but I don't condemn acts of armed resistance. With warfare, I think there is there is a clear moral case against warfare and legal case against warfare, in that you can't go around killing people. People have a right to life. If we have any basis in morality, we have to say it's wrong to go around killing people. So the way the law has kind of worked this out, I think there is a rather neat way you can interpret the law coming out of the Nuremberg trials, where the chief prosecutor, Robert something or other, said that the waging of war of aggression was a supreme crime, and that it contained within it all the other crimes that happened during the war. So an aggressor, and there can be more than one aggressor, of course, is morally and legally responsible for all of the deaths that occur during warfare, right? But you cannot justify even in self-defense. There's no justification for genocide because it is about attacking a people as such. So it is a very clear, unrelenting offense against the principle of distinction. So that it has nothing to do with the person who is the victim. It's all about what the perpetrator wants. There's nothing that can be said about the victim. They're not posing a threat, and so forth. So there isn't a military purpose to it,
So
nor
what is
can't be
so
self.
I mean, what is a people? Like, I know this isn't an easy question, but you've read a lot about this. What is a people?
Ah,
When you when you say like damage or extinction of a people, what does that mean? If I live in Mount Eden, right? If I go to Mount Roskill and I start killing people,
yep.
starting from the close end of Mount Roskill, is that genocide?
Now, well, yeah, yes. So we're
Look,
actually
I'm not
talking
saying
about
I'm
two
going to do
different
it,
things.
Kieran.
No, 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 no. I talked about the morality of targeting people as such. Now that could be applied to politicide, Roskilside, whatever. Um, the the genocide is different technically, or at least to me it is. The way I see it is different in that it involves a genos, which is like a group where familial ties create something. Now, I believe that you could apply the same logic to a class structure as well, even though that is seen as politicide. But the thing is, I mean, that's very important for understanding the nature of genocide, why it happens the way it does. But morally, it's the same in politicide as it is in genocide. It doesn't really, you're killing people for what they are as such. So the moral distinction isn't there. The yeah, the theoretical distinction is definitely there, though. So yeah, that's something else. Actually, it's a good point in this instance, because we're really meant to be talking not so much about genocide, but about the targeting of civilians and the deliberate blurring of the lines between combatant and non-combatant. And that is something, like particularly happened in Indochina, for example, with, the people of, well, actually, it happened especially in the early Cold War, when the Western countries went to fight against the communists, who had gained power sometimes because they were the best resistance against the Axis or Japanese occupiers. They would target them for their political beliefs. The ideology became the reason for targeting them, and so they would create categories of people, such as in Malaya, it was Charlie Tango's communist terrorists. In Indochina, they came up with the name Viet Cong, which just means Vietnamese communists. But then, they wanted to specifically to target the people who weren't necessarily combatants, so they created a new category called Viet Cong infrastructure, which is a very creepy term to use about people. But it only referred to people. It did not mean like buildings or anything else that you would normally call infrastructure.
Yeah.
And they were the main target of the Phoenix program, which was really kind of following on from some fairly brutal espionage efforts, which used torture to gain intelligence. And the Phoenix program became a kind of, not the first death squad program in the world by any means, but it became a paradigm of organizing death squads that was then exported to Latin America and so forth.
Quite a
So
significant one that maybe we should do an episode on that in the future.
yeah, well, yeah, I'm not. It's not something I'm super expert on, but yeah, I think Douglas Valentine has obviously wrote a book, The Phoenix Program, but he also has a book called The CIA is Organized Crime, that has a lot about how they took that model and ran with it, as it were. In fact, it is a bit of a fascist thing. The old death squads in the Spanish Civil War. They had. I don't know if they actually used the phrase death squads, but they had specifically tasked people who went round and went after the usual suspects. And this is an interesting thing about this. The usual suspects are what we would call, the usual suspects are union organizers, activists, intellectuals, teachers, creative artists, and university professors, and so forth. Now, people who've been paying attention to what's been happening in Gaza will notice that those people have been targeted a lot. One of the I don't know if it's strange, but one of the striking things is how poets rise to prominence in these situations and become targets. And, I think that the death of Refat Al-Aria shows, with the intent clearly there, that the horrible way in which they told him they were going to kill him and they terrorized him in the way they did, it showed that as far as they were concerned, he was the enemy, And that's kind of what I'm talking about here, is that they are defining the enemy in a way that is illegal, apart from anything else, but it has nothing to do with military warfare. It is genocidal in nature. So, I mean, one of the things, people can come up with military strategy and come up with a military rationale for these things, but it doesn't mean that they're really military. So the Dahiya Doctrine, for example, is clearly genocidal. I don't know why such things aren't called out more, because it aims to attack the people as such, right? So it doesn't. Oh, sorry. Do I need to explain the Dahiya Doctrine? Maybe I ought to.
I was about, yeah,
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
about to say,
So
Kieran,
yeah,
can we dial it back a little bit? What is genocidal as opposed to mass murdering, for example? And then B, what is the doctrine? I mean,
yeah.
can we build that up?
Okay. So, well, mass murder and warfare is going to be genocidal. So, if you've got an enemy population and you're committing mass murder against them, then it's obviously genocidal because you can't. So, genocidal means that you're targeting the people as such, rather than targeting them for targeting their military, their combatants for a military purpose and their military infrastructure and so forth. So if you are attempting to destroy in whole or in part any national, racial, ethnical, religious group, right? That is genocide. When you're at war, you tend to be at war with an identifiable population. You have different governments and so forth. So therefore, you've already got that defined group there, usually national and probably ethnical as well, or ethnic, we would probably say. So if you're going after the people instead of their armies, that's genocide. That's exactly what Lemkin was saying at the first instance, that this is the antithesis of the Russo-Portalis doctrine. So, yeah, speaking of doctrines, the Dahiya doctrine was named after a suburb in southern Beirut, where the Israelis decided that in order to discourage acts against them, they would inflict disproportionate pain on a civilian area. This neighborhood that where these things where militants were based. But the idea was that the pain would be felt by all of the people, and that would undermine the support for the militants, the Hezbollah. Well, actually, I don't know if it was Hezbollah. Actually, it might have been a Palestinian group. Not really sure of the circumstances, but the point is that this doctrine, which is about a disproportionate response, is clearly very much an ingrained thing in Israel. I think it goes along with a kind of a level of racial chauvinism, a sense of superiority, that you take it for granted that as the superior race, yeah, tempted to use a German word here, but I won't, just because it might be inflammatory. But you really get that sense from this thinking that
Inflame away.
you have,
Inflame away, Kieran.
oh well, as yeah.
It is,
Anyway, as the superior beings
yeah.
with the biggest weapons and so forth, that it makes perfect sense and is perfectly moral that for every one you lose, you kill 200 of them. And you will hear these sorts of statements a lot from Israelis. They will say that sort of thing. And this is a kind of, you can easily see this sort of psychology as a reflection of kind of the punishing megalomania of an abusive parent or intimate partner.
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
very
absolutely.
much like that sort of thing.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely. I mean,
them. Yeah,
it's absolutely horrific,
yeah,
but I do have to beat the drum for the continual 1 of 200 bit, which is that you do hear that from Israelis and Israeli media. You don't hear that from New Zealand media. Like you don't get a lot of republished Israeli media about explicitly genocidal or ethnic cleansing rhetoric from the Israeli Knesset or like powers that be or IDF, but you do get a lot of both Sides-ism from Reuters and AP about who knows really what happened when accidentally, who knows, the last hospital in southern Gaza was hit by something where who really knows what happened
Yeah,
really. Maybe
yeah.
Peter
I mean,
Pan maybe dropped something.
so I don't know if you saw the latest from Reuters, their headline about investigation finds Hamas camera was real target. I mean, we're laughing. It's not even.
It's
It's
not
horrible. It's
Look,
absolutely
it's not
horrible.
funny, but you have to
You know,
fuck.
for listeners though, Reuters had a camera on Nasser Hospital. I mean, they know whose camera it was. It was theirs. So if Israel comes up with an investigation that claims that this camera, what they were targeting was a Hamas camera, which they apparently had to do a double tap strike on, which makes no sense. And this camera's in Khan Yunis. Like, what would Hamas have? I mean, what's the point of any of this? None of it makes any sense. And these people whose camera it was publishing the headline that misleads their own readers into thinking that there's some logic to this insanity is just, I don't, people are going to study this in decades to come and they're
Yeah,
going to be very surprised by what they find.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, y-
Uh,
yeah. I don't like this isn't funny. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for laughing, but
oh,
how blatant it is that these people fucking treat readers like idiots to this extent is honestly, it is hard to fucking it's hard to take sometimes, you know? You just being taken for a fool consistently this much it's tough. It's honestly tough. And I don't know, I hope a lot of other people feel this way because it doesn't take that much, man. Like it doesn't take that much to realize that the shit that we're being fed is just that. And you're right. I mean, targeting, quote unquote targeting, I mean, even that is a at this point is a strong word, right? A camera, a Hamas camera. Can we talk about that? I mean, what the fuck? What the fuck are we talking about, Kieran?
yeah, with a follow-up strike as well. I mean, yeah, I
Hmm.
mean,
Deranged.
it is deranged. But the very idea that they can, yeah, I mean, they just want to come up with excuses for legitimate reasons for targeting anyone. I mean, if you think about like the like there's a lot of Hasbara about why they kill civilians, particularly framed around this whole human shields thing and Hamas being under hospitals and so forth.
I have to
I
quickly interject, Kieran, to ask you
Yeah.
to explain what is Hasbro, what are human shields. Every episode could be someone's first episode. This is my
Okay.
Sorry,
All
it's
right.
my role as
Hasbara
a my
means
role as a host.
Okay. Hasbara means explaining, and it's just Israeli propaganda. Basically, they are trying to. They've come up with a different word. I can't remember what it is, but they're trying to move away from explaining into some other form of propaganda. But it's like the word propaganda. I think Hasbara is taking on negative connotations. Yeah, human shields is legally human shields are when military organizations um, use civilians to displace risk from themselves onto those civilians for various reasons, like making them go through minefields, putting them in front of themselves, all of which practices are documented frequently for the IDF and never, as far as I know, documented for the armed militants in in Gaza. So, well, they say every accusation is a confession about these people. I mean, it goes even deeper than that, because the way they define human shields here is having your military personnel and facilities near civilians. And of course, as lots of people pointed out, Israel has all of its, well, not all of it, a lot of its major military sites are in the middle of cities and so forth. So that, of course, doesn't make the Israelis human shields any more than anyone, any Palestinian is a human shield. But it's still another level of hypocrisy to add onto the existing hypocrisy. So yeah, I've forgotten where I was.
We were talking about, well, we were at a point about war crimes in general, but also human shields. And I thought maybe, I don't know, a provocation or like an interesting point could be to address the consistent defensive kind of point that Israeli and American politicians make about Palestinians being used as human shields, or they're kind of, oh, actually, I think you'll find that this amount of civilians died because they were being used as human shields, as used as a justification rather than as a descriptor.
Yeah.
Which I think
So
takes us back to combatants versus non-combatants. So I thought, where does that put us?
So one of the requirements of international humanitarian law is proportionality. So when you're talking about collateral damage, like incidental deaths to civilians, they are meant. It's meant to be avoided at all costs. There's another principle called precaution. So you are supposed to be, like very cognizant and doing everything to avoid it. In the case of Israel, and the US does this as well, although the US kind of changes their settings all of the time, and a lot of people think that they are far more discriminating than Israel, but that's not always the case. Israel specifically comes up with formulas where they say that a certain level of armed militant, certain rank that they claim someone is, justifies is a certain number of civilian death. But of course, this is all remote killing. This is not in the heat of combat or anything like that. They're basically kind of assassinating people and saying we can kill 4 people with this person because they're, a low level person, and they go up to 200 if they decide that they've got a high level person in a building, they reckon they can kill 200 people with them. Now that is obviously very much against what the law means. You don't just you don't, if you're supposed to be proportional, you don't just write in bureaucratic terms or legalese that, oh yes, we are being proportional because we've got a ratio. It means that you need to justify what you're doing by some sort of immediate threat. But there is never any immediacy with this. It's all highly theoretical, like they're kind of presumably saying that a person of such and such rank could kill up to, I don't know, 5,000 Israelis or whatever. Therefore, we can kill 200 people to mitigate that risk or whatever. I mean,
So what are these? So what are these theoretical? I mean, yeah, this is like, I guess this is where the rubber hits the road in terms of theory versus practice, right? In terms of IHL, international humanitarian law, laws of war, however you want to kind of structure these things. There's a lot of, understandably, I think, nihilism about the value of international humanitarian law these days. What's the point of this? I mean, are we living in a realpolitik world where generals dictate what happens and what doesn't, and law as an institution doesn't have the kind of muscle to even mean anything? Uh, like, what does it mean exactly? Like,
well, I mean, at least look, it's very clear that world leaders are completely corrupt. And so the law can't function while that's happening. But that's a symptom of something larger. You are talking about a decadent international culture because there's a decadent Western imperial culture at the top of it. So the problem isn't that the law doesn't work. The problem is that politics don't work. So it's only a subset of something actually quite a bit greater. So the I think that I think this is a good example of what's the law has certain subjective words in it, and these people take the piss. They take the absolute fucking piss out of it. They are being ridiculous, and if this is why it ends up as a might makes right thing, because there is no goodwill. These people are bad faith actors in every sense of the word. So I think that the law is a good touchstone, and I think that like taking things to the ICJ and getting people to put on paper their thinking. You know, I mean, it can go wrong if some of them turn out to suddenly be deranged, deranged religious fanatics who are very happy that the end times are coming. as, um, as is it Sebutinde, the Ugandan judge who ruled very strangely in favor of Israel when even the Israeli judge wasn't at times. Anyway, she has come out and said that she's, like looking forward to the rapture. So, you do have that. But honestly, I think that the fact that they need to show they're working, it creates a basis for people to refer back to the kind of codified ethics that is the law.
Yeah.
It's imperfect. It's imperfect, but it can be, But at the same time, I have obviously pretty well on record have no time for this ICC bullshit. It's just
No, I mean, yeah, no, look,
it's
100%.
got-
Like,
yeah,
and I think you have to be an absolute idiot to, if you're listening to this and you think that the ICC is the best of all possible worlds, you are living in an absolute fucking dream world, mate. Like, I think we're all pretty aware of the fallacious kind of nature of that. But
yeah. I saw something about like interfering with Ursula von der Leyen's GPS and saying, "Oh, send her back to The Hague," and it's like you're going to send the president of the EU to the court that the EU controls that they use, right? And you think it's going to come out?
oh,
Um,
please, no. Oh,
oh,
not back to my own house, you know?
yeah, exactly.
Must be tough. Must be fucking tough.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no.
wait till they set up like a court in China or something for this sort of thing. Let's
Yeah,
see
I mean there is
see how they
I
like
was
it.
gonna I was gonna bring up in the new because there is like a d- I don't know how to turn this key, but I think there is like an unpleasant kind of geopolitics to this, right? Where the understanding of what international law was after the Second World War has obviously had to change into the modern day. And as the American century dies and the Chinese century begins, we're going to have to change what we as, I don't know, global citizens understand as international law. And I don't want to start like an entire fucking like rant about this, but I just wonder what you think that will mean for at a bare minimum kind of IHL, international humanitarian law, because like I think just for my 2 cents, I think we're already seeing kind of the death of what we thought was rational international humanitarian law in the 90s and 2000s and maybe early 2010s. Like I think for my money, I think after Libya we were fucked in terms of whatever IHL meant because it was so clearly just corrupt and like dark. But I think we all have our own kind of timelines.
Yeah, so I mean, I would say that obviously I'm going to go back to like way earlier than that and say that while it was being formulated, it was being violated. So I think the thing is that for it to have any suasion, uh, there has to be a real serious democratic input into it, and there has to be democratic demands on politics because the way that right say for example, let's imagine that when the genocide convention came into force, was ratified by two-thirds of the countries in the world in 1950. It came into force at a time when the US was committing genocide in Korea, and nobody blinked an eye. Nobody thought there was a problem with that. And I think that one of the things that about those times was the intense racism. Now we have kind of racism has changed, but at the same time we don't have the same expectations of the law to function anymore. So it's kind of I think it does become the low expectations become self-fulfilling. And I think that is a danger. We actually, and this I think is something we are seeing this play out now because the public, I think, does have some expectations. And now that they're starting to understand that what's happening in Gaza is clearly a case of genocide, I think that, they are demanding action. And part of that is because these things are used to propagandize people all the time. They say we do this because such and such committed genocide and blah, blah, blah. And, it's used against the enemies of the West all the time. And so the public obviously considers that it is meaningful. And why wouldn't they? I think these things have a place still. We need changes, not so much in the law, we need changes in the power structure. Yeah, does that answer that question?
Yeah, no, I mean I do think that it's interesting the fine line between kind of culture and law and power, right? Especially when it comes to these kind of international law questions, like there are I guess that there's the nihilistic position about like the non-existence of international law as an institution, and then there's a more I don't mean this in a critical way, but like an optimistic kind of view about the future of international law as a human rights preserving kind of institution. And then there's a kind of pragmatic kind of in between somewhere. I don't know. I don't mean any of those things as a kind of pejorative or even, critical concern, but I do wonder about how these things are changing. Like, I think probably considering the way that the quote unquote West or, the politics of the world has turned since the mid 2010s, I don't think I would have treated international law the same way I did when I was the age I was when I started studying international law at university at that age. And I find it quite like a perverse, interesting, kind of deep, uh, maybe, who knows, change in terms of who will be interested in these things. If we jump to 10 years from now, who will be the kinds of people who will be interested in terms of what international law means? Because when I was fucking in my 20s and thought that international law meant something that could potentially constrain powerful actors, that meant a very different thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess I'm coming from a different background. I preloaded my low expectations in a
That's a
lot of
good.
ways. I did not have that idea that there were functional like authorities that did things to constrain that's not how I think things work. I've always seen, I guess, that as part of like,
Yeah,
I
you're right.
guess I've seen it from an anarchist lens, that it's actually a codification of a general will, and it only works to the extent that it reflects what people actually believe and are willing to stand for. So I don't believe in any sort of obviously responsibility to protect sort of shit. There is no justification for interventionism. However, I believe in international anarchism, which is like a thing, not in international anarchy, which is not necessarily part of anarchism, but it means that states are all equally sovereign. And I think that the way you deal with breaches of international law is collective action, that it's not based on power, but is based um, on the belief of the people. But yes, that's me as as an idealist, although in another respect, far more cynical than you.
No, Matt, like
Probably different.
there's nothing wrong with being an idealist. I think that's like
Oh yeah, yeah. But
there's I wish I was again, like we're both idealists in different ways, right? I think that's a beautiful thing. Like that's isn't that just
yeah,
humanity? Like
yeah,
we're
yeah,
probably approaching the same endpoint from a different standpoint. But
yeah, yeah. Absolutely, yeah,
to
yeah.
wrap up, look, I think really when we're coming down to in terms of what international law and international humanitarian law and customary international law and all of these different terms kind of make of these humans, how do you kind of feel that that's worked out? I mean, just to kind of position that, I think there's an uncomfortable, I want to say, alliance between the way that people are kind of abstracted in these discussions and also kind of, I don't know, abused as kind of tools of empire.
Well, I'll tell you what. There's one thing that is very often a telling indication of genocide, and that's bureaucratization, and like particularly sort of this quantitative thing that you'll find in modern warfare is an indication of how genocidal it is. Because, traditional land based warfare is about strategic points, about terrain and so forth, and it is very qualitative. Now, when you start actually basing things on totting up numbers of, what was called in Indochina techno war, when you've got Robert McNamara coming in and trying to apply modern business techniques to it, and you're counting up numbers and you're creating lists of numbers and so forth, and you've got quotas and so forth, you are really not talking about military warfare as such. I mean, it could be that you're destroying X number of tanks or whatever, but usually this is not what it's about. You're basically treating the people as things, and that's I guess part of the essence of genocide is treating people as things, and they create a discourse to go with this that kind of conflates the combatant and the non-combatant. So they create language like this: communist terrorists, the Viet Cong infrastructure. The Nazis would call people bandits or terrorists. Even the term communist has often been used to imply that someone is a legitimate target. Now, a communist is someone who has a political belief. It doesn't make them a combatant. It doesn't remove from them any of their protected status during warfare. Yet these ideas that are often suffusing to and from death squad practices as well, Like it is kind of there is a constant conversation between what an army is doing and what the irregular death squads are doing, put it that way. So they kind of create these other categories of deniable civilians. So you're killing civilians because you want to kill civilians, but you are denying that they're non-combatants. And this, of course, is where your eliticidal attacks on your journalists, university professors, union organizers, so forth, that comes into it as well. You create a category where you imply to people that these are part of the warfare, that they are. And the people carrying out these acts, they believe them. If you think about that Reuters camera, and that's a lame fucking excuse. Well, what's happened there is this is a planned action, clearly, by someone who thinks that these reporters are a legitimate target. Then someone higher up goes, well, yeah, of course they are, but the world isn't going to understand that. What do we say? And then they come up with this camera. But it's very clear that for the Israelis, they think a journalist is the enemy because they are fighting, they're reporting what's happening, and therefore they're supporting the enemy. And this happened in Iraq too. And I'm really disappointed at how little people talk about the precedent in Iraq. In Iraq, US personnel were told that people with cameras were insurgents. So we all know the famous collateral murder tape, or most people, well, maybe actually it's been that long, maybe a lot of people don't. There's footage that was leaked by Chelsea Manning of a helicopter gunship murdering some people who were some journalists being shown around by some civilians, and one of them had a long lens camera. It's very clearly targeted. They sent it up the chain, got permission to fire, and so forth. So they murdered these people deliberately and then made up something about the camera being a rocket. They thought it was a rocket-propelled grenade. Not rocket. It was an rocket-propelled grenade launcher, which of course was of no threat to them at a great distance in their armored helicopter. But anyway, so hundreds of journalists were killed in Iraq, and more to the point, they had a very much more effective blackout of what was going on than is happening in Gaza at the moment, because they didn't, there was none of the technology available now for people to get their voices out there. So a lot of what happened in Iraq is just, it never hit the news. It wasn't in our social media, such as it was at the time, and almost like it never happened now. So and an important precedent for what's happening. So I guess that's I think they, the other thing to note is that they have for a long time been putting military personnel into what Robert J. Lifton called atrocity-producing situations, creating these insecure places where there's no front line, there's no rear echelon. You're always in danger, and then filling their heads full of panic about the people around them, propagandizing them about the risk from kids, for example. Everyone who went to Vietnam had heard of like a kid attacking people. I've never come across any first-hand accounts, but they were all told that someone knew someone who was like, this kid had thrown a grenade, and you had to be careful of all the kids. And then in Iraq, the US instituted a doctrine of force protection, which was pretty much telling all of their personnel to displace all of the risk on the local civilian population, which is incredibly illegal. And these were extremely heavily armed people who basically that meant that, say, if an IED went off, they would just open up with incredible amounts of weaponry on the local neighborhood. And of course, the militants would be long gone. The insurgents would be long gone because they knew how to protect themselves. But the unwitting civilians would often pay the price, which, of course, was the intent. So, I guess that's the kind of point I wanted to make, that what's happening, what we're seeing in Gaza is a part of an evolution, and a big part of it is finding new ways to justify using military force against civilian populations. And, the object in the end is the ethnic cleansing of the entire Gaza Strip. So the intent is pretty clear.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kieran. What an upbeat and cheerful note to end our night on, as always. Appreciate it.
Mm.
That's life. I can't deny it. As Frank famously said. Thank you so much. That's been another episode of 1 of 200 Midweek Madness. Thanks, Kieran. Where can people find your writing? Do you want to give people
The easiest place is just on genocide.com.
on genocide.com? You'll find everything you need from there. He's worryingly informed, I think you'll find. It's almost annoying, how on top of things he is. All right.
Definitely not how I feel, but
Well, too bad. That's what you get for coming on the podcast. Thank you, Kieran. I appreciate
No, thank you.
appreciate the mahi. That's been another episode 1 of 200. We'll catch you next week.
If artificers are denied, living a pointless life, but learning all your lessons. Fucking politics, there's no distinction. The road's upon now. It's paved with good intentions, and I'll admit that I'm at a loss for what to say when they quote this as a cost we ought to stay. 'Cause I live amongst the people every day.